Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
This didn't happen to me, but it happened to a close friend of mine, and she has told me that she wishes to stay anonymous. But I can tell you that she's in her 20s and she's very attractive. I will write this story as if it happened to me though, so you can hear it the way my friend told it. I had been working late at the office pretty much all week, which caused me to miss my regular bus ride home. Usually, if I wasn't working late, then I would get off the train and then get the bus. But as I mentioned, I was working late, so I had to get a taxi home all week. On the night that this experience took place, I got off the train and I saw that there was only one other person waiting in line for a taxi at our usual spot. I was relieved because at least I wasn't going to be in line for a long time. But just as I was about to stand in line, a man came running down the station steps, and then he ran ahead of me and then got in line. This both surprised and annoyed me, but I couldn't really do anything about it. I should have rushed to get in line myself, I guess. I tried to not let it bother me, since it would only be a short wait until I would be on my way home. I then lined up behind the man. After waiting for about 15 minutes, a taxi turned up and then picked up the first person waiting in line, who was a middle-aged woman. Then, the metal shutters to the train station stairs behind me slammed closed. It was later than I thought. I even wondered if the lights in the station will go out and all the staff would leave. I didn't want to be here alone. Well, I wasn't alone yet. The man who pushed in front of me was still waiting on his taxi. And moments later, a taxi pulled up and the man got in. Before he got in, I think we were waiting for another 20 minutes. This was much longer than usual. And I come to think of it, the first taxi that pulled up was black, and the second one was black. Was it just the one taxi driver working? So, I made sure to take a look at the driver's face. I then continued waiting there alone, and it was a little unnerving. I hoped that a taxi would turn up soon, because I didn't like being on my own in a dark area so late. And then finally, after about another 20 minutes or so, a black taxi pulled up, and it was the same driver that I saw earlier. I got in, and I was tired of standing there, and I'm glad to be able to sit down. I told the driver where I wanted to go, and I asked if he could drop me off a certain location. I asked, "Hi, can you take me to the construction yard?" The reason I asked for the construction yard was because it was really close to my apartment, and drivers and delivery people can never seem to find where I live. The construction yard was well known, so I always asked to get dropped off of there. And with that, we pulled away into the night. It was dark, summer had gone and autumn was here. The taxi driver then said, "Sounds like hard work. Are you going there to work the night shift?" I was a bit too tired to enter into a conversation with the driver, so I replied something simple like, "Yeah, I guess." I am always cautious when giving out personal information. He didn't need to know, so I kept it vague. We got closer to the construction yard, and I started to route around my bag to get the taxi fare. "Do you really work at one of those office buildings by the construction yard?" the driver asked me. What a nosy guy, I thought. "No, I don't," I replied to him a little sharply. I didn't know what he was trying to get at. Why did it matter where I worked to him? And as soon as I told him that I didn't actually work there and I wasn't going on the night shift, he changed. Instead of pulling over by the construction yard, he then sped up and kept going straight. "Hey, you can drop me off here. You're going past it," I said. I started to panic. I didn't know what to do when he didn't say a word. He just looked focused on the road ahead. "Excuse me, driver, here is fine. Let me out," I said. I could now hear the fear in my voice. It had a shaky quality to it. "You got in my taxi on Tuesday night, didn't you?" Yeah, I remember you," he said while glancing at me in his rearview mirror. He was showing no signs of stopping the taxi, and I was really scared now. I was scared of where this was all heading, or where we were heading. I had taken a taxi every night that week, but what did it matter? Why was this guy so invested? I sat there frozen in the back seats of the taxi. I can still remember the song that was playing on the radio and the smell of the leather seats. I couldn't understand what was happening. We drove for another couple of minutes down a dark highway. The lack of light made things 10 times worse. And up ahead, I saw the lights of a convenience store that I use regularly, and I can remember thinking vividly, will anyone find me when this taxi finally stops? I was scared of what the driver's intentions were and what he was capable of. I think at that point, I reached my limits, and silent tears began to roll down my cheeks. What's gonna happen next? I wondered. And then to my absolute shock, we pulled into the convenience store's parking lot, and as soon as we were stopped, the driver turned around and spoke to me in a calm voice. "Hey, I'm really sorry. If you want to make a complaint about me, you can. Here's my card and all my information. You can call my bosses and tell them my name. It's all on my card." He went on to explain that he was the driver who picked me up and dropped me off on Tuesday. And because of the location that I wanted to be dropped off, he remembered me. He said he wondered why someone would want to be dropped off at a construction yard at night. And then he said, "You know that guy who was waiting in line ahead of you at the train station? Well, that guy also wanted to be dropped off by the construction yard." And I remembered that guy, the one who pushed in front of me. The driver said that while he was taking him to the construction yard, he made a couple of calls. He was saying stuff like, "Oh, yeah, I'll be there soon." And, "I think it will be about another 20 minutes after I get there." And then I was thinking, well, so what? They have a night shift in the yard. I can sometimes hear work going on when I walk past there to get home. Why is my taxi driver not taking me where I want to go? I asked him if it could have been a coincidence and what he was trying to get at, and then he replied, "Well, the guy didn't seem to be an employee. There were no cars or trucks in the parking lot, and there were no lights on in the office or in the yard. But then, I saw a minivan parked just off to the side of the entrance. It had blacked out windows, and there were about 4 people in there. And when my headlights landed on the windshield, they all ducked down, as if they didn't want to be seen. So, for that reason, I found those people and my passenger very suspicious. So, I'm really sorry that I took things into my own hands. And if you want to report me for it to my bosses, then I'm fine with that. But I could never be fine with dropping you off there with those men in that van." I stared at the driver. It looked like he had tears in the corners of his eyes waiting to come out. I wondered if there was a reason why he understood the red flags. He was a young guy, and he was taking a big risk by doing what he did. It almost made sense, but I guess that it still could have been a coincidence. But then, I remembered something that made me shiver. While I was waiting in line, my mom called me, and she didn't like it when I worked so late, and she wanted to check in with me. I remember the words I said on the phone. I said, "Yeah, I'm about to get a taxi now." "Uh-huh. Yeah, I'll get it to the construction yard. That man was in front of me at that point in the line, so it began to make sense. Maybe the driver was right. It did seem like the guy in front of me was planning on something. I've thought about it for years, and I am so grateful to the taxi driver. Of course, I didn't report him, by the way. He might just have saved me that night from those men and that blacked out minivan. And I don't want to even think of what their intentions might have been. This happened when I was in high school. At that time, I was working hard on my studies and I was staying late after class as I was part of a lot of club activities. All these extracurricular activities meant that I would end up heading home later than most kids my age. On the day that this took place, my club activities ended at around 8 p.m. So as soon as I was all done, I hopped on my bike and I rode for home. I was riding alone and I didn't have any friends who lived in the same direction that I was heading that night. It was late, but it wasn't super dark out. But I have to say that I lived in a rural area, so the cars on the roads and the streetlights were few and far between. Looking back on it now, I probably shouldn't have taken the route that I usually took to school on the way home when it was dark. It wasn't well lit, but back then I was familiar with the route and I took it to school every single morning, so I never questioned how it could appear dangerous after dark. This route involved heading down some twisting and turning alleys down by the canal. At some points, the width of the pathway got so narrow that you have to walk in a single file. It probably wasn't the best idea for me to be racing through there on my bike. I never really thought of any danger or trouble befalling me down there, and I didn't realize that it was unsafe for a teenage girl until that night. I was rushing home, not thinking about much in particular. I think I was probably wondering what was for dinner, and that's when I saw someone on the road up ahead. This guy was just stood directly in the middle of the pathway. He didn't seem to notice my bike approaching, and he made no effort to get out of the way. He was stood with his back to me, and before I got close, I knew that he was a big dude. I rang the bell on my bicycle, but he didn't seem to react. He just stood there as still as a statue. He gave me the creeps instantly. Who comes out down by the canal to stand in the dark? I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I needed to get past him. I decided that it would be worse if I slowed down altogether, so I tried my best to maneuver around the guy. I feel as if he was stood there on purpose to block the way, and I was scared to get off my bike in case anything happened. I rode as tight as I could to the edge of the pathway, scratching my arm and my bag on the branches of the bushes to the side of me, and as soon as I was next to him, I started pedaling like crazy. The most frightening thing that has ever happened to me came next. He lunged at me, and I swear, he only just missed out on grabbing my school bag. If I hadn't sped up when I was alongside him, then he would have grabbed me. It really scared me. I felt sweat pouring down my temples as I raced away from him. I looked back, and he was running, but he wasn't anywhere near fast enough to catch up to me. I carried on along my route for a little while longer, maybe like another 5 minutes. But I was shocked to see the silhouette of a person stood in the middle of the pathway again up ahead. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the same guy. I remembered seeing his dirty-looking gray coat with my bike light illuminated it, and I felt so much unease and fear as I drew closer. He was somehow ahead of me now. It didn't make any sense. I knew that I didn't want to try and cycle past him again, so I slammed on my brakes and I did 180. I knew that there was an alleyway that led back to a busier looking street back that way. I managed to get there before the man followed me again. I don't know if he chased me that time or not because I didn't have the courage to look back behind me. I stopped my bike under a streetlight and I took out the old cell phone that my parents gave me for emergencies. I tried to call my mom, but there was no service. I got back on my bike and I just headed towards the area which had the most amount of light. And before long, I was able to find a convenience store. From there, I called Mom and I asked her to come and pick me up. I remember that my hands were trembling. I couldn't help but think that that man might turn up again at any second. I was trying to browse the magazines while waiting for my mom. I was still shaken up, but I couldn't focus on reading anything. I then saw a guy outside who looked at my bike and then decided not to come into the convenience store. I have no idea if that was related or not, but I definitely noticed it. I was so paranoid that I felt like I was being hunted. My mom arrived and then she took me home. I told her everything and I was banned from using that shortcut again. Also, if I didn't have a friend to head home and it was late, I was always to be picked up. That traumatic event has stayed with me, and to this day, I still don't like being out on the streets late at night, especially in the colder months when it's darker out. One thing that didn't make any sense to me at that time was how the man appeared ahead of me on the pathway. But I think I can explain it now though. One other night when I was on my way home, I waved goodbye to my friend, turned a corner, and then suddenly, a car sped up from behind me and overtook me while I was riding my bike on the road. It then slammed on its brakes as if to stop me from going forward. I just cycled around it the first time, thinking that it was just some older kids trying to spook me or something. But it happened again, so I knew that it wasn't a mistake. I tried to carry on cycling on the sidewalk, but then the car rode up onto the sidewalk to stop me. And I heard the driver's side door open and I just froze. If it wasn't for another car turning down the street, I'm not sure what would have happened, because as soon as I saw the other car approaching, I took the opportunity to pedal like crazy and make a few turns to try and lose the car. So, if the same person who was driving that night was the same person who stood in the middle of the pathway, I guess that after I pedaled away from him by the canal, he jumped in his car and then drove ahead to a point that he knew that I would likely pass through to wait for me again. Nothing ever happened after the second experience, but I hope that that man got arrested, and I hope no one else had to experience what I did, because I shudder to think of what it would have been like in both occasions without my bike. I don't think that I would have outran him. So then, what would have happened to me? Night 1. I'm 20 and male. I'm a pretty small guy and have a routine of walking my dog in the morning and at night. And what happened these past couple of nights does not seem normal. At 11:30 p.m., this white BMW is driving down the road, and then all of a sudden, he slows down close to me. I assume that it could be a delivery driver of some sort because other people live in our property. And after slowing down close to me, he then speeds up again, and this time, pulling into the house next to mine. I had the feeling that he was going to turn around and then come back, and he did. This time, rolling up real close behind me, and there aren't any sidewalks here. He stops for a second, and then speeds up again past me. I give him that fight or flight look, almost an angry look, and he parks sideways down the street. At this point, I just started running back to our property out of panic, and then he also drives off. Night 2. My girlfriend told me that she would prefer if I went out with another person for safety, and so tonight, we went out together instead. It was a normal walk, everything's going great, except for some paranoia. We turned around to go back home, and I hear this quack noise, like a call or a signal. I look at my girlfriend confused, and her face is pale. I then look at my dog, who is normally energetic and protective, and he has his head down and is frozen in place. I look, and I see a black figure moving towards us that came out of nowhere. I quickly rush my girlfriend and my dog home, and they sped up just as we do. As we get home, he rides past on an e-bike wearing all black, and the bike had no reflectors or night visibility. We are both terrified and unsure of what to do. Luckily, we live inside an RV on a big property with multiple people. So, that's about the only thing keeping me calm currently. Not too long ago, I was driving back home late one night. I had visited a friend of mine who moved out to the sticks. It was always a long drive, and I was feeling more tired than usual that night, so I decided to try out a shortcut that she mentioned. It was really dark out. The stars and the moon were hidden behind the thick clouds. I took the shortcut that my friend suggested, and I headed down a narrow country road. There were no streetlights, so it was hard to see my way. I always avoided the shortcut because I hate driving down dark country roads. But I wanted to get home quicker. It was late and I had work in the morning. I thought of what might happen if a car was coming in the opposite direction. We would definitely be stuck. But just as I was mentally taking note to call out my friend for her terrible shortcut suggestion, I noticed something up ahead. It was faint to begin with. It looked like a stick was glowing, and it swayed from left to right. I wondered what it was, and I strained my eyes to get a better look at it. I couldn't make out what it was, so I decided to turn up my lights to the max. In doing that, revealed the man that stood in the middle of the road, waving a lit-up traffic conducting stick thing. You know the ones, the little baton things that are intended to get the attention of the road users. He was also wearing a high-vis coat. I wondered if there was some kind of construction going on up ahead. I thought about it for a second, and I realized that it didn't make a lot of sense. It was a Sunday night, probably approaching 1 a.m., and there were no road signs or anything to indicate that there was supposed to be work ongoing on that road. As I drew closer to the traffic maintenance worker, well, that's what I presumed he was, he then guided me with his lit-up baton to pull over. I looked behind him, and I saw nothing but an open dark road. No barriers or temporary traffic lights, no workers or any form of lights behind him. It just didn't make any sense to me. That's the moment that I thought that something was definitely fishy about the situation. Also, this guy had one of those clear ponchos that people wear at the theme parks, you know? A raincoat in a sense. It wasn't even raining that night. I mean, what the hell? I wondered. I had to pull my car to stop as I was going to hit him with it. I was feeling really nervous, and I watched as he stared at me through my windshield. He then walked to the side of the car and looked in my windows. Something was wrong here. My brain was screaming that to me. He then finally stood a little off to the side and then indicated with his baton that I was clear and then to keep going. I didn't like that. I didn't want to go any further. I was really nervous of where he was telling me to go. For the record, I'm a female in my late 20s, and I wasn't sure if I could trust that man. Even though I am terrible at reversing, I decided to back up to the best of my ability, and then when there was enough space in the road, I would be able to do a 26-point turn or something just to get out of there. But as soon as I started backing up, the maintenance worker's expression changed. He looked surprised, and then he looked angry, and then desperate almost all at once. It was just unbelievable. He started power walking towards my car, and I let out a scream. He wasn't behaving like a maintenance guy anymore. He was scaring me. I knew that I needed to get away from him, so I gunned it as hard as I could in reverse to try and get away. I had to be careless and not care about bumping some of the trees, rocks, and bushes that lay at the side of the narrow road. I had to pray that a car wasn't coming up behind me too. And I watched in horror as he began to run. I had to keep checking behind me, as well as keeping an eye on him, and it was incredibly stressful. But I managed to create enough distance between us to allow me to turn the car around, and there was a wider portion of the road that I used to do this in. I managed to get away from that guy. I just keep thinking of how there wasn't any traffic lights or construction signs in the area, but just one lone maintenance worker that stood on the road alone in the dark. I don't think it was a ghost or anything paranormal. That was a very real person, and I think that that person had some bad intentions. I sometimes wonder what might have been waiting for me further down the road if I kept going. An ambush? Tire spikes? Or something worse? I find it very creepy how he looked over the car, saw that I was alone, and then waved me on, and when I didn't do it, he gave chase. And needless to say, I am never trying that shortcut again. This happened quite recently, so I am keeping the names anonymous. To give some context, at the time that this incident occurred, I was a 20-year-old female living in Nagano, Japan. I had passion for live streaming on the internet. I would sing, play the guitar, and I was enjoying it so much that I streamed daily. The effort that I put into my daily stream started to pay off, and I gradually gathered a small but dedicated fan base. I had regular viewers that started to join, and I recognized their usernames. We would chat between the songs, getting to know each other a little better, and it was great to meet people who shared my taste in music. One of the regulars was a man who I will call Mr. A. Mr. A always joined the stream and is one of the people that I spoke with a lot. We shared music recommendations quite regularly, and it felt like we had a real connection to each other, even though we had never met in person. One day, when he joined the stream, I thanked him, saying something like, "Hi, Mr. A. That band that you recommended the other day was so great, so thank you." He then wrote in the chat that the band that he recommended, he was able to see them in person, and he got a limited edition signed CD from them. I casually responded with something along the lines of, "Oh wow, that's great." And this is where the horror began for me. In addition to live streaming, I also had a few social media accounts across different platforms. One afternoon, I was scrolling through my feed and a private message from Mr. A popped up. I went to read it, and it read the following. "Hey, I sent you that limited edition CD that I mentioned on your stream." I immediately thought, "Sent where? I didn't give you my address." I had never shared my address during my streams or on social media, so I was completely baffled by Mr. A's message. When I asked him what he meant, his explanation was not just surprising, but downright creepy. Mr. A had tracked down my personal social media account using my public account ID. From there, he found my sister's account, And my sister had a lax attitude toward online privacy and had publicly shared our city and town. From her account, Mr. A discovered my full name, our city, my boyfriend's name at that time, and even my parents' social media accounts. I was so freaked out by this because I had made a very conscious effort to not put anything personal on the internet. And despite my efforts to stay hidden, Mr. A managed to piece together enough details to send the CD to me via postal service hole. I was so creeped out that I picked up the CD from the post office but immediately returned it, telling Mr. A a white lie. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but it seems like the information you looked up about me was wrong, so I didn't get that CD. It should make its way back to you though." At this point, I was trying not to upset him. I mean, I did like chatting with him when he joined my live streams. He had just kind of ruined that relationship though. Since I returned that CD, I felt as if Mr. A's kindness turned to malice. Mr. A's friendly demeanor seemed to turn into something more sinister. His next message, seemingly advice, but potentially a subtle warning or a threat, it said, "Be careful leaving your personal information online. There are people out there who might misuse it." Then, the harassment began. He created numerous accounts with variations of my name and birth date, following my accounts with all these weird new user profiles. Let me explain. If my birthday was January 1st, the accounts would be named things like my name 0101. It is unnerving to see accounts with private information in their names that start to follow me. He also tweeted about places in my town, making me feel as if I was being watched. There was no direct threats, but the fear of being constantly monitored became overwhelming. I think he was being very careful. He knew if I said anything, he could just claim that tweeting about a shop in my town wasn't a crime. I bet he thought he was being really smart. But then the situation escalated. Mr. A tweeted from his account, "I got the Zenrin maps and phone directories. Just a little more to go." Zenrin is Japan's database of a residential map and is used for route planning. It's very accurate. And when he mentioned he was looking into that database and said he only needed a little bit more to go, it downright terrified me. That short tweet sent shivers down my spine. It was clear that Mr. A was trying to pinpoint my exact address. And up to that point, he only knew my city and town, which gave me some comfort. But the thought of him finding my house horrified me, not just for my safety, but also for my family. We couldn't just pack up and move. My parents weren't renting, they were paying to own the house. I felt so scared because if he knew all our names in our city, finding our exact address seemed inevitable. I started obsessively checking Mr. A's account every day, praying that he wouldn't figure out our address. But my hopes were dashed when Mr. A got dangerously close. He identified my grandparents' house from a photo of a nearby rice field that I had posted on my private account. The photo barely showed anything but fields, yet he managed to use Google Maps and the Zenrin directories to narrow down the area, looking for homes with our surname. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to contact the police, hoping that they would intervene without escalating the situation. Their suggestion to directly confront Mr. A with a warning made me reluctant. However, I followed their advice and I sent a cautious message to Mr. A, hoping that it would put him off doing whatever he was plotting. I remember shaking as I was typing, not sure if that was fear or maybe adrenaline, but I wrote, "I have gotten in touch with the police. You need to stop." He came back almost instantly with a chilling yet cowardly response. He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. After that, his numerous fake accounts began gradually disappearing one by one. The tweets about finding my address also stopped, and his dismissive response and the subsequent disappearance of his fake accounts brought temporary relief. But the damage was done. Since then, I haven't faced any direct harm from Mr. A. Years have passed, but the memories of that time linger. I still catch myself checking Mr. A's account, a habit born from those anxious days and the long nights. I'm not scared anymore, but I am very aware, if that makes any sense at all. The internet still is a source of joy, but social media is mainly a reminder of the darker side of human nature for me. I stopped live streaming and I deleted all my social media accounts. Erasing my accounts did come with some tears, but it was for the best. I had to do what I could to protect myself and my family. I learned a harsh lesson about privacy. It's a lesson that I will carry with me. I will always be cautious about what I share and who I trust. The scariest thing about my experience was not just the invasion of privacy, but the realization that behind the screens, humans can be the real monsters. I just hope that he wasn't doing this to others online like what he did to me, especially to those who weren't so careful with the information they share. Reflecting on the whole experience, it's alarming how someone can piece together your life from bits of information shared online. The fact that Mr. A could track down my family members, use public records, and even analyze photos to find my location was beyond my wildest nightmares. In the aftermath, I became almost paranoid about my online presence. I would spend hours going through old posts, deleting anything that could be even remotely revealing, and I changed my passwords frequently. I set all my profiles to private, and I stopped engaging with anyone that I didn't know personally. The internet felt less like a community and more like a potential threat. The support from my family and friends was crucial during this time. My sister felt particularly guilty. We forgave her, of course, but it was a wake-up call. Despite the fear and anxiety, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. I focused on my studies, spent more time with loved ones, and I found other hobbies to fill the void left by my streaming. Even now and then, I would consider returning to live streaming, but the thought of another Mr. A lurking in the shadows always held me back. I continue to hope that Mr. A has moved on, and no one else falls victim to him.
And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.